to justice. Obstruction to justice. Justice now. Well, hello, and thank you for joining another broadcast of Obstruction to Justice. I'm Ann Moles, and today we're just going to be talking about general information about relevant topics of the day. We'll discuss and highlight political issues, maybe, economics, about the community, our surrounding community and communities, and businesses. But today we're going to talk with a wonderful nonprofit entity. And this is going to be a real treat because we're going to be joined by and talk with Pastor Rachel Glenn Williams of the historic St. Paul AME Methodist, Methodist Episcopal Church in Independence, Missouri. Welcome, Pastor Rachel.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for joining. Yes, we're just glad that you were able to. I know you're busy. You know, when we're talking about the different seasons, and there's a special holiday coming up here, the Resurrection Sunday's coming up, and then there's
Yeah.
different celebrations prior to that. So I'm sure, you're pretty busy in what you do, but I want you to share what it is. Look, Pastor, tell us. This is a time where we get a chance to talk about different kinds of businesses, and we've highlighted businesses. Now, church is not really business, it's God's business, which is huge, right? To me, the most important business there is. But, he's in the business to where he paid the price already. And what we
Yes.
do is manage what he's already done and continue to develop it and continue to hang in there for the years until he comes, right? So we're going to talk, you're going to share with us some great
Right.
history about the St. Paul AME Church in Independence. Tell us about St. Paul AME.
It's a very interesting story. Uh, it was founded by Hiram Revels um, and by a group of um, Black people in Independence who had been AME from other parts of Missouri, and they migrated to Independence, and they came together and they wanted to start a church. And so at that time, the main seat was closer to St. Louis. So they petitioned, and one of the founding couples were um, um, one of the founding couples included a man whose name was also Hiram. So it was Hiram Young, who
Hiram.
also, right. So our first pastor and founding pastor was Hiram Revels. But one of the founding members of the church was Hiram Young. And Hiram Young was really kind of famous and prominent at the time. He was a famous horse trainer. He built wagons. Um, and so to have the two Hirams in our history is pretty awesome. As a matter of fact, one of the streets that the church now stands at the corner of is named after Hiram Young. Right across the street from the church is the Hiram Young Park, which one of the members of my church helped get the city to rename um, through an organization that they're founding members of, which is the Concerned Citizens, which um, normally before the pandemic, they meet in our church. They've been meeting virtually, like just about everybody else during the
Yes.
pandemic. And that's just to tie into the history of the AME Church being a social justice um, kind of ministry. We do traditional church stuff. We do worship services. We do prayer meetings. We do Bible study. But we also have always had members of the church from the beginnings of the stages of the church who were about social justice and making the world a better place. Um, and we continue that tradition. Some members of our church who are also members of that organization, Community of Concerned Citizens, um, did a voter registration drive um, around election time to make sure that people were registered to vote. We had members helping people figure out how, if they were going to do absentee voting in Missouri, you have to have that notarized. So finding
Oh.
notaries to get that notarized. I
Now
mean,
see, I didn't know that. I didn't know that you had to have your absentee ballot notarized if you're going to vote a mail-in in the state of
mhm,
Missouri. Now, let's go back. The founding members, the founding fathers and members, I like to say, because if where there's a guy that's a man, there's probably a woman there too. So we don't want to leave the women out. But these were
right.
pioneering, yeah, pioneering people. Now, what year was this church founded?
It was founded in 1866. We will be coming up on our, what is it, 154th church
Wow,
anniversary this year. So we've been around for a long time, and it's
that is
basically been
huge.
in the spot where it is. This is not
Really?
the original building, um, but this building was finished being constructed in the 60s. So,
Okay.
um, yeah,
Mhm.
but
So
it's been around in Independence for a very long time.
a very long time. So we know that the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in what, 1865,
Hmm.
and then from there, so a year later, these pioneers, the state of Missouri was a slave state.
Yes.
So, yeah. So, of course, Kansas wasn't, but Missouri was. So, these men, they found themselves in the state of Missouri. And of course, the AME Church has had a rich history in the social justice movement. And, God allowed them to really play a huge role in speaking up for the African American people. Now, that Frederick Douglass, wasn't he AME as well?
Yes, I believe he
I
was.
believe
Yes.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Frederick Douglass,
Yeah.
which is a pretty popular name if we're knowing anything about our
Hmm.
Black history, was AME, and if not, he was definitely associated with those that
Yeah.
were AME. It was the biggest church movement in that time. So still being I say, raised, the church raising of the
Hmm.
church there in that area was also a pretty big feat too. Now, there's another huge church organization that, is known in Independence. So, even still, for that organization to be there and then here African Americans get a chance to come or came to that area. Do you know why they chose the Independence, Missouri area to settle?
I really don't know. I know um, most of the founding members of our church actually were business owners in Independence.
Hmm.
One of the founding women in our church owned a hotel. Um,
Wow.
I mean, now it started off a little bit smaller than that. You know, it started off with her just boarding people and cleaning houses. But
Isn't that kind of how it starts though? Yeah.
right,
We have
and
to don't
yeah.
despise small beginnings. But yeah, sure.
So
So
so so it was really, I think it was them migrating, probably honestly trying to get closer to Kansas. I'm
Mm.
just being
Yeah,
real.
sure.
Being
Yeah,
being a slave state in Kansas, being a free state.
of course. Yeah.
Independence is closer to Kansas City, Missouri, which is closer to Kansas. As a matter of fact, at some point, because of racial tension, some of our founding members actually ended up migrating to Kansas. Eventually, anyway, the Youngs didn't stay in Independence. They ended up moving their business, and they moved to the Kansas side. But my gut instinct is that's what it was. It was during the time of the Civil War and
Hmm.
slavery, trying to get as close to Kansas as you could get. Um,
Sure.
and that's
Sure.
probably how they ended up here.
Sure. Now, and then too, when we look at the history of the, even though something is signed, it does take a while. Even today, it takes a while to
Mhm.
legislate it to make it happen. So, for the raising and the feat of building and founding a church, it's still commendable. Because even now recent there are all kinds of church destruction, church
Mhm.
violence, and things like that. So I'm sure that it was just as relevant then. Business owners, even there, I'm sure had their issues. So
Yeah.
very commendable feat of raising the church during that time, and it being AME, standing up for the social injustices of African Americans. That's a brave thing to do. There's some conversation, and I'm not going to jump off the subject. I want to come back to you here, but there is some conversation about uh, what I've heard and listened to some of the popular radio, actually, not so much radio, but podcasters, and they want to talk about how a lot has gone on with the communities. Of course, the issues with the police brutality and aggression towards the African American communities and everything. And they just kind of they talk against it to the point to where it shouldn't happen. Now, definitely, we don't want violence or anything, but churches churches should, and not so much as have to or should. I know that our main conversation and our main message is the gospel of Jesus Christ. But, even Jesus himself stood for what was right, and
Mhm.
spiritually, socially too. So, he did stand for what was right and doing it the right way and his way, of course. So, I think that definitely not being out of order is in order to say that the AME Church at that time stood for the rights, civil rights, human rights of people in this country. And even still, I know that there are other churches and people that do stand up for human rights and civil rights as well, and that's very important to do, I would say, in these days and times. What attracted me to invite you was the fact that, yeah, you guys have been around for a long time. Now, I've heard of different church organizations. They've been around for a while. And, hopefully we'll get a chance to invite some others on as well. But the longevity of your the ministry where you actually pastor, what's the key? What has been the key to the longevity of the congregation there in
I
Independence?
I really think part of the longevity is they've been able to tap in to the community, whether it's the community or at large, or honestly, for the vast majority of the history, um, there were still issues of segregation. So we're mostly talking about the Black community. Um, whether it was hosting pageants where people could highlight their artistic ability, where people could study. At the other oldest Black church historically Black church in Independence is Second Baptist, and it's not too far from where St. Paul is. It's really. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the picture, so I'm trying to
That's
point. It's
okay.
like a couple of blocks up that way. um, but between the two of those churches, they really were the heart of the community, and even most of the historically Black churches that now exist some kind of way branched off from somebody at one of those two churches. So I think
Okay.
that's part of it. But I also think there have been lay leaders and clergy leaders at St. Paul who have been tapped in with all kinds of different things.
Okay.
This is something, honestly, I found out after I became a pastor at St. Paul. In 1966, St. Paul had a female clergy person on staff at the church. Um,
Really?
that's highly unusual. She wasn't the
Yes.
pastor, but in 1966, she was female clergy who wore a collar, which obviously said to everybody that she was clergy. She was fully integrated into the ministry of the church. She taught the Sunday school, but she was also the house mother at a girls' home, which ties in that whole social justice piece.
There we
The
go.
other
Yeah.
the other piece for me is later on in life when I was coming into the ministry as a young clergy person. St. Paul was one of the few churches within the city, if you will, within the metropolitan area that had a female pastor. Their first female pastor was the Reverend E. Teresa Nelson, who is now a presiding elder, who's the next level up
Yes.
um,
Hmm.
in our denomination. We have pastors, we have presiding elders, and then we have bishops. She's now a presiding elder in the Colorado area. But she was one of the first, well, no, she was the first female pastor. After that, there have been three others, including myself. So so it is now a church that's used to female clergy. That makes a difference. That's not particularly typical.
Hmm.
Even
Hmm.
I've been pastoring off and on since 1997. There aren't a whole lot of churches in the metropolitan area that can say they've had four female pastors.
That's
Um,
true. That's true.
this this church is one of them. And the various pastors did different things. I know Reverend Nelson also worked with the school system. We There was a pastor earlier on, closer to the 60s, who worked in the school system, but was famous as a choir director in the area. So when I say they were able to tap into other things going on in the community, I think that's the longevity. Um, and that's just the pastors. Like I said, there have been lay people. I keep talking about community of concerned citizens because we talk about racial justice and inequities with treatment with the police. Well, community of concerned citizens help lead to the establishment of the baseline of how the police are supposed to treat people of color in the city of Independence. And it was founded by
Okay.
two members of my church. It currently has several members of my church who are members of the organization. So, um, and that organization is still on point having conversations with the police department now about stuff going on um, at my brain just froze Independence Center, which is the mall in Independence, and
Hmm.
issues since the pandemic with kids hanging out at the mall and how they handled that and how they worked through
Hmm.
that. Um,
Hmm.
so you know, I've I got another member who does small stuff, who be handing out food and masks to folk, even during the pandemic. So, and I got another member who's famous for showing up and helping folk, if stuff's going wrong in their house, even if it's like plumbing. Um, that's kind of the legacy of our church, and I think that's why it's still around, and it's still here.
Wonderful, wonderful. And it to me, it's also the mission of the church. So to the extent where you all have, uh, I commend you for the community, and we call it community outreach. I think that's something,
Hmm.
a term that most people can understand. But community community outreach can only happen if the church members reach out to the community, right?
Hmm.
And yes, I didn't know that the community of concerned citizens was founded by some of your members there. I didn't know
Hmm.
that. And I've heard that term before, and it's very vital. It's a very vital organization because as you know, yeah, there's they're going on trial for the things that have happened in Minneapolis, the police
Hmm.
conduct there. Uh, People are going on trial there, and yes, there are issues and concerns with what we deal with here locally. But one thing that I had mentioned before too, even for what happened last year and all of the they call it civil unrest, right?
Hmm.
Okay, so yeah, we were dealing with as Americans watching and dealing with civil unrest, but in that there still needs to be something, some spoken, some group, some community. People still have to talk about what's going on so that it stays in the forefront of the thought process and we have a voice. So
Hmm.
if you don't stay up on what's going on, then you don't have a voice in legislation, in training, which is big on what we do, ASBNC training and consulting. If you don't stay up on and have a voice, then you tend to fall through the cracks and people forget what's going
Hmm.
on, right? So it continues. But I think even though there's the longevity of the church itself, of course, Emancipation Proclamation signed in 1866, still in 2019, there because there have been systems put in place to identify and oppress and just legislation, people, the media, all of that has played a role in oppressing. And for that reason, we still have to make sure that, look, regardless to what's going on, we have a voice. African Americans have a voice to say, look, this is the way that let's monitor what's going on. I don't believe in defunding the police. I don't think that that's a smart thing. I don't think it's a wise thing. But I do think that community organizations like like the part that that your members devised, developed, and now participate in, are they're vital. They're vital to communities, all communities. So I definitely commend that. And the longevity of the church, what I do here is that that's what you guys are doing. You guys have been doing this since the beginning, since its conception, and you continue to reach out and make sure that these very important concerns are addressed and be a part of that as well. Now, you mentioned that there are founding family members still there, founding family members,
We have descendants of
descendants. Yes.
founding. We have descendants of founding members that are still in our church. Um, there are actually two of the I'm trying to get my words right just in case they catch this. Two of our most seasoned members of the church are both descended from the young who from the Youngs, who were one of the founding families. They're actually cousins because one's descended from the Youngs on one side and one's descended from the Youngs on the other side. Um, I have another um, member of the church who's also connected to them as a cousin. That's the other thing. Um, a lot of the members of my church are somehow connected to each other family wise. um, and if they don't go all the way back to a founding member, they may go back to a member from the 30s, from the 1930s or something like that. Another thing I discovered once I became the pastor is they're also related to some folks who I pastored at other churches. Did you know that before? Folk in Independence are related to folk all over the metropolitan area. Um, so that was news to see the connection. Um, but thank you
Mhm.
for mentioning that because until you mentioned it, I didn't think about that. There aren't a whole lot of churches who can say
No.
that having been around for more than 150 years, you currently have members of your church who are somehow connected to founding members of the church.
Descendants
So
of the founding
yeah,
members of the church. That is
that's a big deal.
huge.
Yeah.
That's
And
huge.
and I would also say, you gave me the chance to do it. I'm gonna tout my members on. I have some very creative people who are members of my church. They've done portrayals of some of those founding members. They've done it within the church, but they've done it within the school system, and at libraries. Um, I have at least two members who have written books on the history of independence, whether it's on the church. One wrote one on the church, and another one wrote about growing up in the neck in Independence, which is the old black neighborhood in Independence. And so, I just got some creative folk. I got a member who's been writing plays since she was a kid. Um, so it's kind of cool to be their pastor, actually, because God's gifted them in some really awesome ways. So,
Yes. And it's good to know that. So, we definitely want to invite you to come back and everything too. And yeah, we get a chance to maybe get a chance to talk with some of the whoever wants to join to talk about what they're doing. What you guys are just doing big things down there over there at the St. Paul uh AME Church in Independence. So for sure, we definitely would like for to be able to talk more, about the portrayals and the history. That
mm-hmm,
that's just great. It's great. It's exciting to hear. 150 years of being in the ministry, being in that vicinity and ministering to that community. That's something that I think a lot of churches should take notice of. I think that people in
mm-hmm,
churches, church organizations do try to be that voice and be that help. A lot of churches they get it. Okay, we want to help the communities. We want to be a voice. But how about hanging in there and retaining members and encouraging members? Now, I'm not surprised to hear that the members there may be related to each other. Maybe that's the gas, the go get 'em gas
mm-hmm,
that that they have. They're related to each other, and for the go getters back in the day, the business owners and the founding members and everything, business owners, you have to wake up pretty early in the morning to get things going. And
mm-hmm,
being one myself, I know how that works. But then too, the creativity that comes and the desire and the drive that comes. So for the people to be descendants and related to each other in some form or fashion, that's pretty exciting too. And I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised in that. Of course, having a pastor that encourages that and embraces that and, you know, toots the horn, to say, hey, we have people over here. We have parishioners that are doing big things over here. Now, I'd like for you to share, how did you get called to be a pastor? What did you do? What
Well,
tell us your
that
journey.
that's a very interesting story. I am the daughter of a pastor who was elevated to the level of presiding elder. Who actually, my father was my first presiding elder, so that's kind of a little weird. I My two brothers are clergy, and they have both pastored churches. Um, I actually, though, answered my call the latest in life of my siblings. I had three brothers. Two are still living, but all three of my brothers answered their call to preach when they were teenagers.
Mhm.
Two were 16, and I think one was 14. I
Mhm.
answered my call to preach when I was 20 years old. I was majoring in international relations and French. I was overseas in France. I was sitting in the park and I heard this song in English. So in France, everybody's speaking French. I'm hearing this song in my head saying, I'm calling you over and over again. And I'm looking around in the park, um, uh, trying to figure out what's going on. I get back home. I have a conversation with my father about, so what is the call like? I have a conversation with each of my brothers. So what is the call like? And I'm like, okay, I kind of sort of think God is calling me to preach. I ain't down with this pastoring thing though, but I think God is calling me to preach. Um, and after a year of struggling and then going through the process, I enrolled in seminary, went away to seminary in Boston. I went to Boston University School of Theology uh, for a couple of reasons.
Mhm.
I, at the time, the dean of students was an AME preacher who was a friend of an AME preacher that I knew here
Mhm.
in Kansas City and recommended the school to me. But then I also found out that that's where Dr. King got his doctorate from, and I was like, oh, well, all righty then. This
All
sounds like
righty
this might
then.
be the spot for me. Um,
Right.
I went away to seminary, was there for 3 years, actually met my husband there. Um, we moved back here. I got ordained um, fully. I got my elder's orders in 1997, and I got assigned my first church that year. Um, and I've been going pretty much ever since. I took off from pastoring for 2.5 years, and I went back to school and got my second master's degree in marriage and family therapy. So I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist as
Okay.
well. I'm not practicing right now, but when we lived in Topeka, I practiced in Topeka. Um, I helped develop a parenting program that I ran with a member of St. John AME Church in Topeka at the Rescue Mission in Topeka. Um,
Wonderful.
so it's the that's kind of my journey. It, some folk, I guess, would kind of call me a legacy because my father was a pastor, an AME pastor. Actually, my mother's father was an AME pastor.
Okay. See,
So
I'm getting this. The calling
uh,
kind of thing, and
uh,
how legacy in families,
right.
the heritage gets passed on. So
it,
that's just a
it
big
really
plus.
does. Because on my father's side of the family, we have all kinds of clergy. All my cousins
Mm,
are clergy. Now they're
mhm.
Baptist, pretty much every flavor of Baptist. Um,
Okay.
the younger generation, we've got Kojic, we got Church of God in Christ.
Mhm.
I say my family's got pretty much every flavor of Christianity there is. I think we might even have some Catholics. I don't know if we have any nuns or priests, but I wouldn't
Mhm.
be surprised just because of how deep it tends to go in my family, having
Mhm.
gone through the history on both sides. Um, God's had God's hand on our families for a
That's
while.
wonderful. That is
So
wonderful. Now, I'm going to go out to the website here. We're going to take a look. And for those that want to, just get some more information, I love websites. I think they're just, that's what's up. So if you're doing anything, a nonprofit, um, a nonprofit organization, any type of business, get a website and make sure that people are aware of where that website is. This one is the St. Paul AME C Independence MO dot myfreesites.net. Okay. And here you can take a look at the historic St. Paul AME churches here and the address. It's in Independence, 200 East Lexington, Independence, Missouri 64050, and the phone number is 816-252-2557. Now, are you all are still holding services at this time, or are you
um,
having to get?
not in person services. We're we're
Okay.
we're still doing it virtually. Hoping and prayerfully that we'll be able to get back to in-person services soon. One more shout out for my church. We still have class leaders in the AME church, and my class leaders have been on point. They've been contacting members and giving them information how they can get access to the COVID-19 shot, and those who are in tiers where they're eligible. I think we're at the point where we've got like 50, maybe 50 to 60% of the congregation has gotten at least one shot. Um, so that's, I, I, I praise God, and I praise God for the ingenuity of, of our lay leaders in our church who took the time to reach out to people to,
That's what it's
to help.
about, reaching out. We are also affiliated and work with the uh, Labors for His Harvest Ministries, and one of the main focus foundation of what we do is we develop disciples and to go out. And I think that with that, that is has been the heart of where what we do when we come alongside ministries, other ministries to help with their outreach ministries or whatever, going out and witnessing or any type of community event that that ministry needs help with or would like some even some training in, we do that. So when I hear that a church says, okay, we're going to come in and we're going to make sure that the parishioners, the people are aware of what's going on, and we're going to contact people, that I don't know. That's not the norm. I think that what people do mostly they'll uh different churches, they'll go ahead and they'll post something on Facebook. Nothing wrong with that. They'll send you an email, and you have to make sure you're on the email list. Nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to call somebody, pick up the phone and call someone and say, hey, this is what's going on. How are you? Do you need assistance in anything? Where we know where the COVID shot is going, and where you can go and get some help with that if you need it. That to me is really where you get a chance to help, and you're effective. You're effective. To hear a voice to on the other line of a phone. I know that sounds kind of old fashioned to some, but even with when in business, I'll pick up the phone and talk with people if I can. Now, I'm not a cold caller. I don't like hounding
Mm,
people, but I will get on the phone and reach out. And I think that is something that is kind of missing when it comes
Mhm.
to the different churches and different ministries. So kudos to your team, to your church parishioners that make sure they'll pick up the phone and talk to each other and call and reach out. And what I'm hearing is that there's also within the church nonprofit organization, there are people that are over groups, and those what leaders they reach out
Mhm.
to the different members in the group, and that makes it personal. That makes it. I think that's very effective as well. I can't remember the last time I've received a call from any church other than my pastor friends, right? But
Mhm.
being a member somewhere, if it wasn't, and, there's this one pastor that he's really on point. But he does the calling, and that's cool, and we appreciate that. But I think too that the members need to be involved as well. So,
Well, especially in a post-COVID
mm,
world where you have people who are isolated. I mean, we have um, some members who are in a nursing home, and they've
mm,
been the most isolated of anybody. I mean, that nursing
mhm.
home to try and keep infections down, lock basically lock the nursing home. I
Wow,
mean,
yeah,
people who come visit, and so without being able to call, you
mhm.
lose the connection. You're right. The emails are good, texting is good, even Facebook messages is good. But every now and again, you need to hear somebody's voice.
You need to
Um,
hear somebody's voice, churches. I will say that to me, that is one of the most important things to do, to reach out to the people. Here, about St. Paul, I see that there's a link there and it talks about the mission, the vision, the goals. So you can definitely go out there and take a look at that. Uh, Now, the as far as the history, is that something that's detailed on the website too?
the history is a little bit detailed on the website, but not as heavily. And honestly, part of that is because um, unless you're at a certain generational point, seeing a lot of history about an organization can turn off some generations by just seeing it
Okay.
out there.
All
Uh,
right.
Knowing that it exists and that it's been around for a while and doing bite-sized pieces of information will get people interested. But one of the things that I found, honestly, and it started with my own generation. I'm a Generation Xer, and I'll be the first to tell you, I love history, but I don't want to read it on a website because it takes up too much space. I
Okay.
I want to know what you're doing. I want to know
Sure.
what you're involved in. I don't want to see a whole bunch of pages about your history because that makes me think that everything that you're about is in the past. If you
Okay.
can give me sound bites about your history and also give me sound bites of what you're doing today, that says there's continuity and there's longevity, um, and that there's
Yes.
balance.
Relevant. What are we doing today? What's relevant? I think that's probably where the Facebook platform has kind of been a one up on that. It's
Mhm.
timely. It's what's happening today. It's what's happening in the moment. But yeah, super suggestion there to know that if your website is out there, don't clog it up with a bunch of history. Give the bite-sized pieces of it, of what's going on with your organization, and make it intriguing to maybe they'll look you up more, right? So
Yeah,
maybe
I would add, especially because in this day and age, websites are what the telephone book used to be.
okay.
People go to the web to find out if you exist, if there's
Mhm.
anything relevant. So if you never update your website,
Yeah.
if your website has information that's 5 years old and it's obvious that that's the case, Like if your website says the pastor is one person and a person is intrigued enough to call and they listen to the voicemail and it's a totally different person according to the voicemail,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
probably not gonna get that person to come back. I'm gonna be honest.
Mhm.
If it's not a church, if it's a business, and I
Mhm.
Google the business and I see all this information about the business on the website, and I contact them, and everything is different from what was
Mhm.
on the website, I'm not doing business with them.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and that's why I
Yeah.
say websites function more like, for those of us who are older and who use telephone books, they function like telephone books
Mhm.
that are amped up because you can see more than a name and a number.
Right. Right. Super cool. Super suggestion there, uh for sure. Now, we talked about the website. We talked about that you guys are online. So they can, if they want to participate on some of the online, are you on doing any live streams? How can they participate in your online services?
We live stream the sermon and the end of the service onto our Facebook page, which is
Okay.
also the historic St. Paul AME Church on Facebook. Um, Also, some other things we put on Facebook. We do a weekly prayer, that'll be on Facebook. We do some Bible trivia questions. So we do some things like that. The whole entire service, uh, we do by conference call. That's also how we do our Bible study. Um, the information about the phone number and everything is on the website for that. So those are some ways that people can participate.
Okay. So it's the historic AME Church in Independence on Facebook.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I see it. And I'm just going to drop a link in here to where I'm going to drop a link in our chat window there. So it's the
Okay.
Facebook Historic St. Paul Independence.
Yep.
That's
That's
uh
it.
that's it there. So yeah, for sure. And if you want to participate and get some information about what's going on, so that Facebook page is super. That's good to know. Good evening. Reza Singleton has joined us, and good evening to you, Reza. Uh, Good to have you on. Now, we've talked about the history, the reason why, the longevity of the church, the importance of community outreach for church organizations. That's one of the reasons why the longevity, the desire for the people in the church to want to reach out and
Hmm.
participate, uh, and everything, and then your journey with the church. Your journey with the church has been commendable. I tell you, being a woman in the church and everything, that history. You don't have too many women pastors that are within an organization that will allow for it. Which there's still a
Hmm.
lot of work, guys. I'm not into the okay. Well, this denomination allows pastors or women preachers, and this one doesn't. I'm just going to do my job, and that's whatever the Lord calls me to do, and I'm going to do the best that I can at it, whether you like it or not. I see me in the Bible, right? I see my job in the Bible, and I'm okay with it. And I think that that's what people should do, whatever their job is, and they can see where they've been called to do a work, and that doing something, for the Lord and doing your best for the
Hmm.
Lord. I think is what's important too. What else? What's going on? What's going on? What can you see as far as the efforts of what are you hearing about as far as what's the one of the things that they're really focusing on? Maybe the lay members, those that are in the church, your church members that participate in the the community of concerned citizens organization, and what's going on? What are they really? What are people really focusing on as far as church and social injustice or social justice, or what do you think? What are you hearing in your
It,
communities?
honestly, it depends on who we're talking to. For some people, it's going to be the issues with um, the justice system and how the justice system still is lopsided. I have other members who a major issue is healthcare.
Mm,
Um, uh, Real talk, having to choose between paying for medication or paying for groceries. Um, for, for,
mhm,
for some of my congregation, that's the social justice issue.
mhm,
Um, for me right now, I'm gonna be honest. My new soapbox social justice issue is quality internet and utility access. After all of that time a few weeks ago, where there were power outages all over the place, the real deal is historically black communities in quote unquote lower economic places, they lost their power earlier and it lasted longer. And they were
mm,
losing their power intermittently before. Um, there are issues all over Kansas and Missouri, both in the city and in rural areas, where folks still have dial up, and that's the only internet access they can get.
mhm. I
How
agree.
are folks working? How are folks working from home?
Mhm,
How were kids getting access to school? I mean, it's really sad when a company has to buy a van and outfit it with Wi-Fi so kids in the neighborhood can do their schoolwork.
mhm, mhm.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And with all of the internet hype that went on a few years ago with the uh, high speed internet and fiber internet and all of this. I'm not going to name any company names. Everybody knows who they are and what company names that were offering those types of services. You would think that there would be better internet service, but I believe you're on point there because I know I've spoken with several, and I know one of the things when we do an analysis is to determine what type of internet you have access to. And a lot of times the companies already have a monopoly in that area. And if you don't have an account that's a good account or whatever with that company that's providing service in that area, then you're not really going to get good internet service. The hotspot is something else that they push, but it costs more. It
Mhm,
costs more to have that type of better
mhm,
internet service. And yes, with the COVID and other remote requirements for that, I do see, and I have seen, we've done some volunteer work with the organization, with the LFHHM organization, where we've worked and supported that organization to actually send tutor volunteers out to do some tutoring with the children that are homebound or organization bound or whatever, to where they can't get to school and parents can't work. So that has been a real big mess. And with that, that's kind of what I'm tying in the where you're speaking of the internet access. How do people work from home? How do children get their schoolwork done without good quality internet access? Well, they give them hotspots. And I think I got rid of, well, mine is probably put away because, right now, even with technology, your mobile phone is probably going to be faster than a lot of
mhm.
the internet options that are in the different lower income communities. And I think they kind of do that on purpose. I don't know why. If there's one thing about it, it is about economics. If you don't have a market for that type of service, you're going to provide the better quality service for the market that's going to pay. So I
Mhm.
see that, which, yes, in these days and times that you do have to address, well, okay, well, what's so big about your internet there to where you've been funded by the government to build these different networks. You didn't come out your own pocket to build these networks. You were given grants by the government to build these different networks, including the 5G. Okay, but yet you can't provide quality internet access to communities that, whether it's the prime market or not, so that they have access to where it's not costing them an arm and a leg, or they don't have to try to use their mobile phone to see things and work with things, work with their internet access. I agree. And that's a big, huge conversation that can go on and on. I'm curious to see what this 5G is going to do. Everyone
Mhm.
has it. Well, they're saying that it is, but we probably need to do a broadcast on that as well. What is 5G, and what are the safety precautions of 5G, and where are the towers for 5G? I'm curious to know. Yeah. So I agree. That's big. And again, that's a voice to say, hey, this is what's going on, and we need to talk about it some more. And that's kind of what we do here on Obstruction to Justice. We want to talk about some things that other people aren't talking about. We want to talk about some things within the communities, all kinds of communities, and not to just talk about one type of community, but all kinds of communities. But not to forget the important communities, that we're all important. And we all
Mhm.
deserve just as much as the other communities. You know, I agree. I agree. Pastor, anything else you want to share? Anything else you want to mention while we're here?
Just that, um, although when I answered my call, I couldn't see myself pastoring. God had other plans. When I answered my call, I also couldn't see myself married to a preacher, let alone another pastor. And I am. My husband is also a pastor. We pastor separate churches in separate communities, and we've got two kids. So, juggling all of that can be a challenge, but it's also a joy. And I'm grateful to God, to my husband, to my daughters, that they allow me to do what I do, and we give space for each other to do what they do as well.
I think that's
One other
important.
thing, my oldest
Yeah.
kid is this awesome musician. I gotta, do a shout out to my kids. And my youngest kid is this budding artist. So I love my girls. They are awesome. So that would be the only thing I would add.
Budding artists. What type of genre do they sing? Does your a musician, or does your child play it?
My oldest instrument, she plays piano, oboe, flute, and she taught herself how to play guitar. She also sings. She's also an awesome artist. She likes to draw. She wants to do digital animation as her career. Her younger
Wonderful.
sister can draw, but she's a better painter, so she likes that. And she also likes music. That's another thing that runs in our family. My oldest brother played 5 instruments. I think my husband's father played plays 4. So, you know, skip me and my husband, but
Uh-huh.
with to our kids,
Me
skip the
too.
generation.
Me
We,
too. I'm
we,
like,
we,
okay, well, but I was listening for maybe one instrument, and here she's playing 5 instruments. Now, do they do anything in the church? Is there something that they've decided to do? Do they play the instruments or sing in the church?
My oldest daughter, especially when we were in person, she was actually starting to play for the little kids for their choir. Um,
Okay.
on the piano, she was teaching them different songs and things like that. She also on Youth Sunday, um, they kind of the kids do the service, so they'll either sing or sometimes she'll play an instrument. The oldest one will do. The youngest one still likes to do prayers and stuff like that. So yeah, they're
There we
involved.
go.
Um,
That's very, very important. Very important. Very good. Very good. It's good to hear. Pastor Rachel, I tell you, you've got a lot going on. You've been
mm,
through a lot as far as just continuing to do God's work and your ministry, the ministry that you pastor over. I commend that. 100 over 1866. That's a long time. A long
mm-hmm.
time. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
and we're gonna invite you back, and we're gonna
All right.
bring bring folks. Let's talk about what's going on. I'm very, very interested, and I'm sure others are too. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us as well. Just know that, look, one thing that we, I believe, really mentioned and talked about is getting out into your communities to make a difference. We can hang out. Yes, I understand the COVID and all that. And I think that that's by design in some situations. I'm not going to go into that right now. But just know that when you get out and do what you're called to do, and or work and do your business, do it with everything you have. Do it with everything you have, and hang in there. And thanks for joining. And we'll see you next time.
Justice now. Justice now.
Justice. Justice now.